Hey everybody, welcome back to the This Week in Co-working feed. We're here with a behind the news interview with Mark Gilbert. Mark, how are you?
I'm well, Hector. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for jumping in. So, for folks who are wondering what this is all about, the GSA, who is the General Service Administration for the US government, have recently awarded a new contract. We're going to dive into exactly what that is. But before we do that, a little bit of background. If you've been following the newsletter since way back in 2021, you'll remember that the GSA awarded a $50 million contract out to 5 entities for a program called the FCS. Then in 2024, they rolled out this internal network called Fed Cowork. And now in week 13, 2025, they're implementing a thing called EWM. Now, a lot of abbreviations, it has to be since we're talking about government, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Mark, to tell us a little bit more about this history. What was the FCS? What is Fed Cowork? What is Space Match? And now what is it that you're being brought in to do?
Yeah, happy to. And feel free to interject as I unpack that arc of history, Hector. In 2020, right before the onset of the pandemic, the GSA issued the first of a series of RFPs. And as you mentioned, the first one was called FCS, Flexible Coworking Services. And the pandemic ended up delaying the award of that contract. But about a year later, they executed an award for Flexible Coworking Services. LiquidSpace had the great fortune of being one of 5 recipients alongside DeskPass, my good friend Sam Rosen, WeWork, Expansive, Bill Bennett's organization, and The Yard. What GSA was looking to do and did with that program was formalize a contracting vehicle, a procurement process for the government to be able to procure co-working space and be able to offer that as an option to the GSA's customers, which are the federal agencies and their 2.3 million employees. Prior to that, there had been no formalized structure to bring efficiency and a little more speed to procuring co-working. And so that first program was met with a great deal of hope and enthusiasm on our part, certainly, and I think the other recipients. Mm-hmm. And to our, Hector, to your and our sort of shared audience of co-working operators and suppliers and other participants, I think there was a lot of excitement that, hey, here's a great example of a large enterprise, a public sector one, that's gotten the news. They've embraced the future, and they too will be tapping into co-working. So that program was launched in 2021.
Yep.
We can drill deeper on that if you want. I think the outcomes of that have not been as substantial as many had hoped, myself included, but save that. So that was step one. FCS is launched. The government starts to cut its teeth on co-working. Through the last year, through 2024, the same general community of leaders and managers at the GSA began experimenting internal to the federal government with in-house co-working. They began piloting. In fact, they created 6 locations utilizing existing owned or leased federal offices where they had excess space, and they fashioned those environments into internal co-working spaces that were set up to anticipate and support users from within the federal employee base only. So private co-working for this audience of 2 million users. And in so doing, kind of begin to learn about what it might look like to try to drive up the utilization of underutilized federal space and get acquainted with what types of environments are needed and what are the transactional requirements and how do you generate awareness and what makes for a positive user experience. What's hospitality all about? What will we fun? Things that the audience here certainly knows in great depth. That was step 2. Fast forward to the near history. Early in 2025, 6-8 weeks ago, the GSA actually put out a press release and announced another program that they called Space Match. And that press release is searchable. You can find it on Google, search GSA Space Match. But that press release describes the government's or GSA's desire to actively solicit across government or actively seek out opportunities where federal agencies that own or had leased space had excess, and also other agencies that might have need. And the government was seeking to play an intermediary or play a matchmaker or a manual marketplace, if you will. In the weeks that have followed, there's been a very encouraging flurry of activity within government, of agencies of all types saying, yeah, I've got some excess space, or I need some space. Mm-hmm. Those three things, the original FCS program, the internal co-working or private co-working experiments, this recent conviction and initiative around Space Match, have all come together now with the most recent development. About 6 weeks ago, the GSA, actually about 3 weeks ago, the GSA issued an RFP for enterprise-wide marketplace. And that RFP, in its scope of work, detailed the government's desire to find a partner or partners to provide a marketplace platform, a digital platform that had been scale proven. So it needed to be walk like a duck, talk like a duck. It needed to be a platform built to be a marketplace, to allow space to be listed and allow space to be searchable and bookable. Mm-hmm. In addition, they also, in their scope of work, required AI-based portfolio management strategy guidance. They wanted a tool that could also, working in conjunction with a marketplace, support their analysis of their existing portfolio to identify opportunities to make smart portfolio decisions. And some in your, I'm sure actually many in your audience have probably been following some of the news in government, and the GSA, as many agencies are, is aggressively exploring opportunities to reduce cost. And there's actually been a fair bit of news even published about the likely termination of a substantial amount of the federal leased office portfolio. In fact, the new commissioner of the Public Building Service, which is the GSA unit that manages the federal office portfolio, has said publicly on the record that his objective is to reduce by 50% the leased footprint. So this RFP came out and said, listen, we want to, here's my shorthand interpretation of it, Hector. We want a digital platform that can allow us to take Space Match and all of the other concepts like commercial co-working and put it all on a digital platform. Here's the subtle and novel thing. They want to combine both the federal assets, the internal private stuff, mm-hmm. with the commercial co-working space that we all represent. Put it in one platform where those two elements of supply could be interleaved. So hypothetically, I, as a federal employee on a given day, might log in Wichita and I'm looking for a 10-person space for a month, or I log in Plano, Texas, and I want a 4-person meeting room for 2 hours. Depending upon who I am and what permissions I've been given, I might see and book an internal meeting room, or I might book a commercial co-working space on a 6-month agreement. Powerful concept, and one that we see playing out not just in government, but it's also becoming kind of the playbook and the portfolio and workplace strategy of a growing number of very public enterprises. People like T-Mobile and Allstate and others are doing this very same thing in principle. They're combining their internal portfolio, mm-hmm. making it shareable, and interleaving co-working space.
It's definitely a trend we're seeing, as you said, with enterprises who have space, so even bringing people into their spaces, subleasing on kind of flexible terms, but also giving their network that true hub and spoke play. I know we haven't said hub and spoke since 2021, but that is essentially what we're talking about here, just on a large multi-member organization called the federal government. To bring it all home, the RFP went out a couple of weeks ago. It was just awarded, and I believe LiquidSpace is the awardee or one of the awardees.
Correct. That became formal and binding yesterday afternoon. And I can speak to what I know to be true, which is LiquidSpace received an award to implement on a rapid timescale inside of the next 4 to 6 weeks to stand up and launch a enterprise-wide marketplace.
Okay. Is that a pilot, or is it a predefined period of time? What are the expectations around that?
Yes, and yes. And so it's being framed as a pilot. The government, GSA, had identified a number of agencies that they know to have a high appetite for this, as well as some particular regions that they see large opportunities for efficiency gains that are the target area for this program. The award is for a pilot that can run as long as the first 12 months. The purpose of it is very clearly articulated. It's by GSA. It is to generate as rapidly as possible the evidence that the platform and the business model and concept are working, that agencies, i.e. the customer of the GSA, are willing and able to list and share their space to positive end utilization, and that commercial co-working for the first time ever can be brought into a real-time bookable instant book type capacity. Side note here, Hector, for years, the GSA has had a similar program in the travel realm. There's a established portal, a marketplace function called Fed Room, which allows federal employees to book hotel rooms. I need to travel to Wichita. I need a hotel room. And this GSA sponsored marketplace platform makes the hospitality industry, travel providers, easily bookable by federal employees. While there will be differences in what they're doing here with enterprise-wide marketplace, the basic principle is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that exciting? And why is that interesting to our friends across the co-working and flexible office industry, your audience at Syncaroo and with This Week in Co-working? Most of the audience members have started to taste, some more than others, instances of large enterprises that were never customers of theirs in the past starting to be users. GSA is a big customer.
That is very true, but it's also a very different kind of customer. Is there any specific requirements on which kind of third party? Because you've been doing this for a little bit through the FCS.
Yeah.
Now that it's becoming more on demand and kind of drop in, is there anything that operators need to kind of keep in mind given the process you've already gone through in order to be able to facilitate this big new customer?
It's an excellent question. I wish there was more clarity that could be brought to the answer on that. I think I can say that GSA's objectives here on the inside now, I can share their objectives are to make workplace more flexible, to make it substantially more efficient, cost effective, but they also appreciate that they're going to need space. They need space today and they will need space in the future in many more places than their large and perhaps oversized portfolio is. They also, I think, are looking optimistically or aspirationally, you might say, at how do we make this as easy to use as possible. And so in the distant past, working with the government, and then maybe not in the, heck, maybe in the even not so distant past, in general, working with government has been a more complex contracting landscape. And there's oversight and challenges and contractual obligations, and we've had to impose those on our partners in the fulfillment of the FCS program for the last 4 years. We will see how things play out. I believe there's a strong sentiment to try to lighten or lessen the friction associated with tapping into space. And we're certainly going to do all that we can to steer and support the GSA in not overly complexifying what it would take to book an Expansive or to book a Car Workplaces or a Lucid or Premier or what have you. And because we think there's enormous opportunity in doing so. If too much friction finds its way back into the cogs of this, it's just going to bog things down the way we've seen in the past a little bit. So we'll see. I guess I'd want the audience to know that we're attuned to that dimension that you just touched on, Hector, and that we're going to be pushing to try to move it toward the delightfully simple, straightforward, book it with a click type experience that our customers enjoy and our venue partners enjoy.
Sounds like a lot of work that you have to do, but also sounds, as you said, a huge opportunity. If everything goes superbly well, let's look on the most optimistic side of this.
Sure.
How does this help the federal workers, their agencies, and co-working spaces? If you had to look at those three overlapping Venn diagram, what's that sweet spot in the middle where everybody wins?
If everything goes as hoped for, as GSA leadership hopes, the data quickly, in weeks and in a relatively few months, builds the case that this is working and that it should be scaled. They want that to be the case. If that's the case, they will go from this pilot contracting to a much broader base, ongoing and longer term commercial commitment. So that will need to be true. And that may be evident in a few short months. It'll certainly be, a decision will be made on that no later than 12 months from now, because that's what the pilot term is. Why is this good for the federal worker? If the GSA's path takes them in anything like the direction that we've seen with our clients, Spotify and T-Mobile and AT&T and Verizon and Amazon and CVS and Allstate Insurance, if their path and what they learn and experience in terms of an employee people dividend, then they're going to see their federal customers, their employees that they're serving, having more diverse, more conveniently located, more easily engageable environments to get work done. And while government may have requirements or mandates even around returning to the office, if it goes the way it could and should, the office is going to become a much richer range of options that will benefit the employees of the government. To the co-working community, to partners of ours like Central and Blank Spaces and others that have had extraordinary success with the enterprise clientele that we brought in, it'll be the next brick in that wall. It'll be the next sort of acceleration on that flywheel. And we put out a mention of this award yesterday on LinkedIn and in a short press release. But when the largest enterprise occupier of space jumps on this bandwagon and says, we're going to embrace marketplace, we're going to embrace flexible office, we're going to embrace space sharing, we said something to the effect of, that's more than just a moment in time. It's a whole shift. And I think it will just further propel the conversation and the confidence and the change and the behavior change that's already sweeping across the rest of the market. It's going to embolden more and more organizations to move in the direction of embracing flexible office even more than they have to date. And that's the rising tide that's going to benefit everybody in your and my community. In many ways, it won't be much different than that. It's just another really big win. And everyone should be excited about enterprises, plural, moving on with the future rather than returning to the past.
As always, Mark, you've summed it up in such a way that I cannot wait to see what happens next. As you've said on stage before, LFG, let's see where this gets us. We're really excited. Thanks again for joining us, Mark.
Thanks, Hector. And thanks to all the operators and owners and partners and community managers that make this ecosystem what it is. This opportunity with GSA wouldn't exist without that. And thank you for your advocacy. I greatly appreciate it.